reality is the main story, but the most interesting things have always been off the beaten path. Welcome to Side Quests of Reality, the paranormal investigation podcast for people who know the official story is never the whole story.
Usually, when an institution makes just a colossal public mistake, there's, a grace period.
Right, like a little window to fix things.
Exactly. You get this little window of time to quietly walk back a statement, maybe issue a subtle correction in the back pages of a newspaper, and just let the news cycle wash it away.
Yeah, let people forget about it.
But July 1947 offers this absolute masterclass in institutional panic. I mean, it is the equivalent of trying to put toothpaste back in the tube on a global scale.
Oh, for sure. And the toothpaste here is the official military announcement of an extraterrestrial spacecraft.
Right, and the tube is the United States government.
Which is wild. The
Yeah.
whiplash is just unprecedented in modern military history because, we aren't looking at some minor clerical error or like a misquoted private.
No, not at all.
On the morning of July 8th, 1947, the elite Public Information Office of the Army Air Forces issued a press release proudly announcing the capture of a flying disc.
A flying disc? They literally used those words.
They did. And then, barely 24 hours later, they issued a second release that completely contradicted the first one.
Claiming it was just a weather balloon.
Exactly. And that incredibly narrow 24-hour window of contradiction basically bursts a mystery that has endured for almost 8 decades now.
And untangling that 24-hour window is exactly what we are doing today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are working from the Side Quests of Reality case study, which is filed as SQR-UFO-002. And it takes a remarkably disciplined look at the Roswell UFO incident.
And that discipline is so important here.
It really is. The mission of this document, and, our objective right now for you listening, is to strip away 78 years of commercial mythology.
Yeah, we have to get rid of the noise.
Right. We are throwing out the alien autopsy films, the tourist traps, all those late-stage hoaxes, and just the endless cultural noise.
Because there's so much of it.
So much. We are looking only at the strongest primary witnesses on the ground, the undisputed bureaucratic actions of the military, and the official government explanations.
And we're doing this with absolutely no predetermined conclusions.
Exactly. We're just following the paper trail of the facts.
Which requires establishing a baseline of reality first. I mean, before analyzing the actual physical debris that crashed in the New Mexico desert, you really have to understand the specific environment it crashed into.
The setting.
Right. The setting is the most critical variable in this whole equation. Roswell Army Air Field in the summer of 1947 was home to the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force.
Okay, let's put the 509th into historical context for a second, because they weren't just, a random assortment of pilots.
No, they were elite.
They were the only unit in the entire world capable of delivering nuclear weapons at that time. I mean, these were the men who dropped the atomic bombs on Japan to end World War II just 2 years prior.
Right, the stakes literally could not be higher.
Exactly. And the geopolitical reality of 1947 meant the Cold War was rapidly freezing over. So the United States' entire strategy of nuclear deterrence rested solely on the shoulders of the men stationed at this specific base.
And the psychological profile of the personnel at Roswell is really what anchors this entire case.
Because they weren't easily rattled.
Not at all. The military does not assign easily spooked, prone to panic individuals to guard its nuclear arsenal.
Right.
The security protocols were draconian. The men of the 509th operated under this permanent crushing cognitive load where a single mistake could theoretically trigger a global catastrophe.
Wow. Yeah, when you put it like that.
So they were trained to be meticulous, skeptical, and hyper-observant.
Think about the day-to-day reality of that training, too. These men were intimately familiar with conventional aircraft. They tested experimental military technology all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And which is highly relevant to this case. They launched standard weather balloons from that very base on a regular basis.
Yes, constantly.
So they knew exactly what meteorological equipment looked like, how it flew, and, how it shattered when it hit the ground.
They had seen it 100 times.
Right. If you're the Secret Service and you see a tourist holding a camera, you don't mistake it for a weapon.
Because your physiological stress response is trained to instantly differentiate the two.
Exactly. So if the men at Roswell saw a standard weather balloon, their training dictated immediate mundane recognition.
And that caliber of professional observation is the fulcrum of the Roswell incident?
It has to be.
Yeah, if the 509th Bomb Group misidentified a pile of foil and rubber as a flying disc, it demands that we accept a massive, collective psychotic braid among the most highly vetted men in the American military apparatus.
Which is a huge leap.
It's a massive leap. But to understand why the command structure at that base reacted with such unprecedented panic, you have to trace the debris back to its origin point.
Because this didn't start with the military.
No, it didn't. It started with a civilian tripping over something the military didn't even know was missing.
The spark that lights the fire here is a rancher named W.W. Mac Brazel. He managed the Foster Ranch, which is this incredibly remote stretch of desert roughly 75 miles northwest of Roswell.
It's out in the middle of nowhere.
Literally nowhere. And on July 7th, 1947, Brazel makes this long, dusty drive into town and walks right into the office of Sheriff George Wilcox.
And he tells the sheriff he found a massive debris field out on the ranch a few days earlier.
But the physical description of that debris field is what's vital here.
Yeah, because Brazel wasn't reporting a single intact object sitting in a crater somewhere.
It wasn't a flying saucer stuck in the mud.
Right. He described a wide dissemination of materials scattered across an area nearly 3/4 of a mile long.
That is huge.
It is. And he brought samples with him. He had chunks of tinfoil, broken wood-like beams, strips of rubber, thick parchment-like paper, and pieces of material with strange markings.
Let's analyze Brazel's baseline knowledge for a second, because a 1940s rancher working alone in the high desert is, like, the definition of a practical man.
Absolutely. No nonsense.
He deals in tangible realities, livestock, weather, machinery. Furthermore, he had actually recovered weather observation balloons on the Foster Ranch before this incident.
So he knew what they were.
He knew the smell of burnt neoprene. He knew what radar reflectors looked like. But the physical properties of this specific debris were entirely alien to his everyday experience.
And the sheer volume and the unusual nature of the materials are really what prompt Brazel's actions here.
Right. If this looks like a pile of foil and sticks, why wouldn't a rancher just throw it away?
Yeah.
I mean, what makes a guy drive 75 miles to involve the sheriff?
Exactly. If he had stumbled across a typical downed balloon, a few yards of torn rubber and some balsa wood, he would have just shoved it into a ditch or thrown it in the back of his truck and completely forgotten about it.
Yeah, he had work to do.
But the scale of this wreckage compelled him to stop his livelihood, pack up the samples, and drive 75 miles to involve local law enforcement.
He felt a civic duty.
Because the debris fundamentally defied his understanding of the world.
And Brazel never backed down from that assessment either. Even weeks later, after the military had firmly established the weather balloon narrative, he gave an interview to newspaper reporters where he stated, firmly on the record, he said, "I am sure that what I found was not any weather observation balloon."
He was adamant.
He really was. He knew his own land, he knew what standard equipment looked like, and he knew this was an anomaly.
And the anomaly was severe enough that Sheriff Wilcox took one look at the materials Brazel brought into his office and immediately bypassed local authorities.
He didn't even mess around with deputies.
No, he picked up the phone and directly contacted Roswell Army Air Field. And the base's response indicates they instantly recognized the potential gravity of the situation.
Because they didn't dispatch, like, a junior officer in a jeep to go take a look.
No, they sent their top intelligence officer,
Major Jesse Marcel. And this is a man whose entire career architecture was built on accurate assessment.
He was a very serious guy.
Very serious. He was a seasoned combat veteran of World War II, and he had served as an intelligence officer during the atomic bomb tests at Bikini Atoll in 1946.
So he understood advanced tech.
He understood the physics of highly classified weaponry and the strict adherence to chain of command protocols. So Marcel drives out to the Foster Ranch with Brazel and spends hours physically handling the wreckage in the field.
And the tactile reality of that wreckage is what cemented Marcel's conviction.
The primary source documents detail his observation of this shiny wreckage that behaved impossibly.
Yeah, he handled tinfoil-like material that possessed a physical memory. Like, you could crumple it into a tight ball and it would smoothly unfold itself without a single crease.
Which is mind-blowing.
And he handled lightweight, metallic-looking I-beams that could not be broken, burned, or cut with the tools they had on hand.
Let's pause and look at the material science of 1947 for you listening, because the standard for lightweight, durable material at the time was duralumin, which was used in aircraft construction, or balsa wood used in modeling and radar targets.
Right, plastics were basically in their infancy.
Exactly. Ditinol, the shape memory alloy we use today in things like medical stents, that wasn't discovered until 1959.
12 years later.
So when Marcel is standing in the desert in 1947 holding foil that instantly flattens itself out, he is looking at technology that fundamentally does not exist in the human scientific record.
Which perfectly explains his actions on the drive back to the base.
Yeah, because it's the middle of the night.
Right, and instead of taking the debris straight to the secure hangar, Marcel detours to his own home.
He wakes up his family.
He wakes up his wife and his 11-year-old son, Jesse Marcel Jr., spreads the wreckage across the kitchen floor, and tells them they are looking at pieces of a flying saucer.
The psychological weight of that decision is just staggering to me. You don't wake up your 11-year-old kid in the middle of the night to show him a broken weather balloon.
No, absolutely not.
An elite military intelligence officer returning from a debris field violates protocol and wakes his child only if he is experiencing a paradigm-shifting moment.
You do it because you believe you are holding a piece of history, and you want your son to bear witness to it.
Exactly. And Jesse Marcel Jr. spent the next 35 years of his life, literally until his own death, acting as a profoundly consistent witness to what he saw on that kitchen floor.
He meticulously described those I-beams.
He did. He noted they were about 12 to 18 inches long, weightless, and impossible to bend. But his most persistent memory concerned the inner surface of those beams. He described a series of symbols running along the metal.
Yeah, he initially compared them to Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Right.
But he later clarified that upon closer inspection, they were strange geometric symbols, some resembling a seal balancing a ball, and he maintained his entire life that these markings represented an entirely unknown language.
Which is such a specific detail for a kid to remember.
It really is. And decades later, in 1978, his father, Major Jesse Marcel, finally broke his military silence and went on the record to corroborate the core of his son's story.
Marcel Sr. explicitly stated the weather balloon narrative was a cover-up.
He did. He reiterated that the material was as light as balsa wood, but as strong as steel, and was absolutely not of this earth.
But I want to ask you, how do we align that 1978 confession with the skeptical view? Because skeptics usually point out some issues with Marcel later in life.
That's true. We have to balance this. The skeptical response to Marcel's late-in-life confession usually focuses on inconsistencies in his peripheral details.
Like his military record.
Right, he did embellish aspects of his military record in interviews during the 1980s, but if we examine the psychology of human memory, puffing up your own resume 3 decades after the fact does not automatically invalidate your central observation of a traumatic or extraordinary event.
That makes sense.
Throughout every interview he gave until his death in 1986, Marcel's core claim remained rock solid. He knew what weather balloons were, and the indestructible material he carried out of the desert was not one of them.
So as the sun comes up on July 8th, Major Marcel drives this anomalous debris from his kitchen to the base.
Back to reality.
Yeah. He walks into the command office and hands it directly to the highest authority in the room, which is Colonel William Blanchard, the commanding officer of the 509th Bomb Group.
And Colonel Blanchard examines the wreckage.
He's looking right at it.
He listens to the briefing from his top intelligence officer. And then Blanchard engages in crisis decision-making that just defies all standard military logic.
It's wild.
First, he immediately orders the debris site on the Foster Ranch cordoned off by armed guards.
Okay, that makes sense. Secure the area.
But then he turns to his public information officer, Lieutenant Walter Haut.
And this is the moment the toothpaste leaves the tube.
It really is.
Blanchard orders Haut to draft and release an official statement to the wire services announcing that the Army Air Forces have recovered a flying disc.
We really have to dwell on the cognitive dissonance of this action.
Because if you are the commander of the world's only nuclear strike force, your job is literally to not make careless public statements.
Exactly. Colonel Blanchard's day-to-day existence was defined by extreme protocol, threat assessment, and secrecy. His whole career hinged on avoiding mistakes like that.
So why would he risk his entire career to announce a flying saucer unless he was absolutely convinced?
He wouldn't. The bureaucracy of the military in 1947 was so rigid, you don't casually send an official, authorized announcement from the world's only nuclear bomber base to the global press without absolute certainty.
It's unthinkable.
Blanchard understood the media landscape. He knew a press release of this magnitude would trigger an instantaneous global firestorm.
Which it did, within hours.
Right. So by authorizing that release, Blanchard signaled that the physical physical evidence sitting on his desk wasn't just convincing, it was so undeniable that it bypassed standard classification protocols.
It's the ultimate paradox. I mean, the skeptical narrative requires us to believe that the commander of America's nuclear strike force looked at some crumpled tinfoil and balsa wood sticks, completely short-circuited, and accidentally told the world he found a spaceship.
It's a really tough sell when you look at his credentials.
But almost as soon as that headline hit the international wires, the military machine woke up and slammed the brakes.
Oh, they slammed them hard. The chain of command aggressively reasserted itself. By the afternoon of July 8th, the wreckage, or at least the wreckage the military chose to present, was loaded onto a B-29 and flown to Fort Worth Army Air Field in Texas.
Which was the headquarters of the 8th Air Force.
Exactly.
This sets the stage for the infamous press conference. You have General Roger Ramey, who is the commander of the 8th Air Force, his chief of staff, Colonel Thomas Dubose, and a base weather officer named Irving Newton.
And they invite the press into Ramey's office, where this pile of crumpled material is just spread out on the carpet.
And Irving Newton steps forward and formally identifies the material.
Right, the weather officer.
He tells the press corps that they're looking at a standard Ronson radar target, which is basically a kite-like array of foil and balsa wood attached to neoprene balloons.
Used by dozens of weather stations to track high-altitude winds.
Right. And General Ramey declares the mystery solved. The men of the 509th simply made an embarrassing mistake.
And then the press takes the photographs.
Oh, the photographs. If you look at these pictures today, the psychological tension is just palpable.
It's so uncomfortable to look at.
It really is. You see Major Jesse Marcel, the battle-hardened intelligence officer who just hours prior was marveling at memory foil, and he's crouching over a pile of obvious garbage.
He looks completely defeated.
He's staring at pieces of ordinary tinfoil and wooden sticks. I compare it to a hostage video. It is so jarring to see an elite intelligence officer posing with ordinary foil just hours after his base claimed they found a flying disc.
The visual evidence of those photos directly contradicts everything Marcel observed in the field.
Everything.
And Marcel would later state unequivocally that a bait and switch occurred. He insisted the mundane radar reflector photographed in General Ramey's office was entirely different from the anomalous, indestructible material he brought from Roswell.
But how did the public just accept this overnight? I mean, today, a 24-hour turnaround like that would spawn immediate congressional hearings and 1 million internet investigations.
Oh, Twitter would be losing its mind.
Exactly. But the sociological landscape of 1947 was entirely different.
You have to remember, the United States had just won a devastating global war. The military was a revered, unquestioned institution.
They had absolute trust.
They really did. When a high-ranking general stood up and said, "Nothing to see here, just a weather balloon," the press took him at his word.
The psychological relief of a mundane explanation outweighed the terror of the unknown, and the story vanished.
It vanished for almost 50 years.
50 years.
Yeah. The military maintained the weather balloon narrative until 1994, when the Air Force finally admitted that the story General Ramey sold to the world was, in fact, a fabricated cover story.
But wait, they didn't admit to finding an alien spacecraft, did they?
No. They introduced a new, heavily documented explanation. Project Mogul.
Okay, Project Mogul. This is a masterclass in Cold War paranoia and acoustic physics.
It really is fascinating.
For you listening, in the late 1940s, the United States desperately needed to know if the Soviet Union was successfully testing nuclear weapons.
But they couldn't fly planes over Russian airspace.
Right, so they turned to the atmosphere. Specifically, they utilized the SOFAR channel, which is a deep sound channel in the upper atmosphere where low-frequency acoustic waves can travel thousands of miles without dissipating.
And Mogul was a highly classified initiative utilizing massive trains of constant-level balloons.
How massive are we talking?
We are talking about arrays stretching hundreds of feet long, carrying sophisticated acoustic microphones and radar tracking targets designed to loiter in the stratosphere and listen for the distinct pressure waves of a Soviet atomic blast.
That is incredible tech for the 40s.
It is. These arrays were launched from Alamogordo, New Mexico, and the Air Force concluded that one of these massive, highly classified balloon trains went off course and crashed on the Foster Ranch.
I have to admit, the elegance of the Project Mogul explanation is undeniable.
It's very compelling.
It perfectly solves the puzzle of the debris field's massive size, because a Mogul array was huge.
Right.
It explains the intense, immediate military classification. If the military admitted they were launching acoustic surveillance balloons, they would have tipped off the Soviets to our monitoring capability.
Which was the biggest secret we had.
Exactly. It's the perfect Cold War spy story. The cover-up wasn't hiding aliens. It was a desperate, improvised misdirection to protect a real, vital national security secret.
And Mogul even provides a brilliant, grounded explanation for the most bizarre detail of the physical debris.
The hieroglyphics.
The hieroglyphics on the I-beams.
This is a perfect example of historical supply chain mechanics. During the post-war material shortages, the military contracted various manufacturers to build components for Mogul.
They used whatever they could find.
Right. The radar targets were constructed using leftover materials, including a highly specific manufacturer's tape from a New York toy company.
A toy company?
Yes. This tape featured a recurring pattern of geometric, purplish pink flowers.
So, when an 11-year-old Jesse Marcel Jr. looked at the tape in the middle of the night, his brain interpreted faded, stylized floral patterns as alien geometric symbols.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So why doesn't this close the book entirely? I mean, what's the missing piece?
Well, from an investigative standpoint, Project Mogul wraps the physical debris and the military secrecy into a perfectly coherent package. It is the logical endpoint for the inanimate objects.
Okay.
But the side quest of reality case study doesn't stop there, because Mogul encounters a hard limit.
And what's that?
It categorically cannot explain the persistent underlying claims that the military recovered something biological. It cannot explain the bodies.
The bodies. Navigating the body claims is, well, it's like trying to retrieve data from a severely corrupted hard drive.
That is a perfect analogy.
You have 78 years of cultural contamination writing over the original code. When someone's brain is saturated with decades of UFO movies, documentaries, and conspiracy theories, it fills in the missing sectors of their memory.
Right. Eventually, the human operating system can't tell the difference between a real memory from 1947 and a scene from a Steven Spielberg film.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is on fire, and people keep throwing fake needles into it.
Exactly. This is the definition of false memory syndrome, and it requires an honest, ruthless accounting of the historical timeline.
Because in 1947, during the actual event, not a single primary eyewitness mentioned extraterrestrial bodies.
None of them. Mac Brazel didn't report them. The initial military telexes didn't mention them.
No one said a word about bodies.
The narrative of alien corpses didn't enter the public consciousness until the late 1970s and 1980s, often arriving as dramatic deathbed confessions from alleged secondary witnesses.
And the case study heavily scrutinizes these late-stage claims because they constantly contradict each other.
They're all over the place. Witnesses claim the bodies were found at different locations entirely separate from the Foster Ranch. They report different numbers of beings with different physical descriptions, and you also have to factor in the malicious noise.
The hoaxes.
Yeah, the Majestic 12 documents that surfaced in the 80s, which were proven to be elaborate forgeries.
And the infamous 1995 alien autopsy broadcast.
Right, which the producers later admitted was a special effects hoax shot in a London apartment.
The commercial mythology surrounding Roswell is basically an industry designed to generate revenue, not truth.
Exactly. And this massive layer of noise is why the vast majority of late-stage body claims must be dismissed as sociological artifacts rather than evidence.
But, and this is important, the rigor of our framework demands that we don't discard the entire data set just because parts of it are corrupted.
Right, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have to separate the late-stage hearsay from the primary core.
And sitting right at the edge of that core is one specific claim about biological entities that we cannot easily dismiss.
Because of the unique institutional profile of the man who made it.
Right. We have to look at the man who actually typed the press release on the morning of July 8th. Lieutenant Walter Haut, the base public information officer.
Walter Haut's behavior over his lifetime is just a study in stoic discipline. For almost 60 years, he maintained a remarkably low profile.
He never cashed in.
Never. Whenever researchers or journalists pressed him about Roswell, his narrative was impenetrable. He would say, "I was the PR guy. I typed the words, Colonel Blanchard ordered me to type. I saw no debris. I saw no craft. I was not part of the recovery."
He presented himself as just a simple administrative cog in the machine.
Because he was honoring an oath. Haut and Colonel Blanchard weren't just colleagues, they were close personal friends.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Haut spent his life protecting Blanchard's legacy and maintaining the military silence he was sworn to.
But the psychology of aging and, the proximity of death often alter how men view their oaths.
They really do. And as Haught entered his final years, he found a legal and moral loophole to his silence.
In 2002, Haught executed a deeply formal legal action. He prepared a sworn, notarized affidavit detailing his actual experiences during the Roswell incident.
But he applied a strict condition.
Right. The affidavit was sealed with explicit instructions that it could only be opened and published after his death. He passed away in 2005, and the document was finally released to the historical record in 2007.
And the contents of this affidavit completely shatter the official narrative.
They really do. Haught reveals that his involvement was not limited to his typewriter.
According to his sworn statement, Colonel Blanchard personally took Haught out of his office, walked him across the base, and brought him into Building 84, which is one of the highly secure hangars.
And Haught's physical description of what was inside that hangar is incredibly specific.
Yes, he describes a metallic, egg-shaped craft resting on the floor.
An egg-shaped craft.
He estimated its dimensions at 12 to 15 feet in length and roughly 6 feet wide. And he explicitly noted the absence of conventional aeronautical features.
Right, there were no windows, no wings, no tail section, and no landing gear.
It was a seamless, unidentifiable object.
But the affidavit doesn't stop with the craft, does it?
No, it doesn't. Haught wrote that partially covered by a canvas tarp on the hangar floor, he observed 2 bodies.
Bodies.
He estimated their height at about 4 feet, noting they possessed heads that were disproportionately large for their bodies.
And he also detailed attending a morning staff meeting, didn't he?
He did. He said pieces of the anomalous debris, the indestructible foil with unusual markings, were passed around a table of senior officers.
And his affidavit concludes with the profound assertion that no one in that room could identify the material, and that he was convinced he had observed a spacecraft and its crew. Let me play devil's advocate here for a second. The skeptical view is that he was an old man who absorbed decades of pop culture into a false memory.
That is the safest, most logical dismissal.
You argue that Haught, as an elderly man in 2002, simply integrated UFO lore into a fabricated memory to feel important at the end of his life.
Right.
But when you apply pressure to that skeptical dismissal, cracks really start to appear.
Oh, definitely. First, you have the testimony of his daughter, Julie, who was present during the drafting. She went on the record stating they went over the affidavit word by word and that Haught was entirely lucid, understanding the immense weight of what he was doing.
But more importantly, look at the timeline. But this guy avoided the spotlight for 60 years. If Haught wanted fame, money, or the adoration of the UFO convention circuit, he could have cashed in during the peak of Roswell hysteria in the 1980s.
He could have made a fortune.
He chose 60 years of silence instead. Why risk your legacy and the reputation of your commanding officer from the grave just to spin a sci-fi fantasy?
The institutional psychology of his actions just doesn't align with a hoaxer.
It doesn't.
But the most disruptive element of Haught's affidavit isn't the description of the egg-shaped craft or the biological entities. It is the identity of the man who allegedly showed them to him.
Colonel Blanchard.
Exactly, the base commander.
Right. A commanding officer managing the nuclear deterrent of the United States does not violate extreme security protocols to pull his public relations officer into a classified hangar just to show him a crashed Soviet listening balloon.
No. And he certainly doesn't bring him in to look at bodies that don't exist.
So if Haught's affidavit is an accurate reflection of reality, then Project Mogul, no matter how elegantly it explains the acoustic arrays and the toy tape, cannot be the complete truth of what happened at Roswell.
It just can't be.
So when primary witnesses contradict the official government explanation, an investigator's next logical step is to bypass the witnesses entirely and examine the bureaucratic machinery.
You go looking for the paper trail.
Right. Because in 1947, the military generated a staggering amount of paperwork for even the most mundane operations. Every flight, every accident, every personnel movement was logged.
Which brings us to the mid-1990s.
The GAO investigation.
Right. Seeking to finally settle the Roswell question, a New Mexico congressman initiated a formal inquiry requesting the General Accounting Office, which is the supreme investigative and auditing arm of Congress, to conduct a forensic search of all government records related to the incident.
And they have serious power.
The GAO has the authority to pierce almost any veil of classification to locate administrative histories.
But the mechanics of what the GAO found, or rather what they didn't find, is deeply unsettling.
It really is.
They discovered that the administrative records concerning base activities at Roswell for the exact time period of the incident had been entirely destroyed.
Not misplaced, not archived in a forgotten warehouse, but destroyed.
And crucially, there was absolutely no bureaucratic record indicating when the destruction occurred, or by whose authority the order was given.
Which is highly illegal. Out of all the sprawling archives they searched, they recovered only 2 pieces of government paper originating in 1947 regarding the event.
2 pieces of paper for the biggest event in the base's history. But the absence of the administrative logs isn't even the most damning discovery.
No, it's not. The GAO specifically searched for the official air accident report.
Right.
In 1947, Army Regulation 1520 mandated the permanent retention of all air accident reports. It was an ironclad rule, essential for tracking mechanical failures and pilot errors.
Yet, for an event that triggered the most massive, rapid deployment of military assets in the history of the Roswell base, no accident report exists. It's the paradox of the paranormal, right?
Yeah.
The biggest events always seem to leave the emptiest filing cabinets. I mean, it's just like the Rendlesham Forest incident.
No, exactly like Rendlesham.
But this isn't a ghost story. This is the United States military. How does the military just lose the paperwork for an incident that made global headlines? The bureaucratic impossibility of that absence speaks volumes.
We must be intellectually rigorous here, though. The absence of a file is not, in itself, empirical evidence of extraterrestrial visitation. But it is undeniable evidence of a sustained, highly irregular suppression of information that violates the military's own core operating procedures.
Because you do not illegally incinerate the mundane administrative traffic of an entire bomber base just to protect a classified acoustic balloon project.
Especially when the weather officer in Texas had already successfully sold the cover story to the public.
Right. The story was dead.
The destruction of those records suggests the underlying truth was far more toxic to the military than a downed Mogul array.
So let's synthesize the remaining facts here. Once you aggressively strip away the hoaxes, the forged Majestic 12 documents, and the commercial mythology, you are left with a very stark set of unshakable facts.
The actual signal in the noise.
Exactly. A practical rancher found an expansive debris field of materials that defied his understanding of physics, and he knew it wasn't a weather balloon.
An elite intelligence officer collected wreckage that possessed anomalous memory properties and insisted until his death it wasn't a weather balloon either.
Government records were mysteriously and illegally destroyed.
And a silent PR officer left a deathbed confession detailing a non-human craft and bodies.
And all of these data points constantly orbit the single most difficult fact, the central unresolved question in the entire Roswell case. Colonel William Blanchard.
He is the key.
He possessed the highest security clearances. He was briefed on experimental aircraft and classified projects like Mogul. He had the anomalous wreckage spread across his desk and the frantic assessment of his trusted intelligence officer ringing in his ears.
And facing all of that, his immediate instinct, before the brass in Texas or Washington could intervene, was to order Walter Haut to tell the entire world that the United States military had captured a flying disc.
The tension of this deep dive lies in the official record asking us to hold 2 contradictory realities in our minds simultaneously.
It really does.
I want you to think about the cognitive load of that reality for a second. If the Project Mogul explanation is the whole truth, the absolute total truth of the Roswell incident, it means the commander of America's only nuclear bomber base was so easily confused by a radar reflector and some toy tape that he accidentally told the world we found a spaceship.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It is. You have to ask yourself, when you weigh the extreme actions taken by these specific men against the mundane official explanation, which is harder to believe.
It is a question that the historical record, when stripped of its contamination, just refuses to answer easily.
It really does. This case remains officially open on the record in SQR-UFO-002. If you are intrigued by the architecture of these historical anomalies, make sure to subscribe to Side Quests of Reality so you are notified when the next deep dive drops.
Because there's a lot more where this came from.
Because when these strange cases start talking to each other in unexpected ways, the patterns that emerge are even more disruptive. Thank you for joining the deep dive. The truth might be buried under 78 years of noise, but the signal is still broadcasting if you know how to listen.
You've been listening to Side Quests of Reality. The full case file for this episode is available at www.sidequestsofreality.com. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who asks the right questions. Subscribe. The next case is already open and will be available soon.